Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 28 of Compliance Into the Weeds, a podcast where, with my colleague and friend Matt Kelly, we take a deep dive into the compliance weeds on a topic of interest. Today, we take a look at a blog post by Matt Kelly last week, which was entitled Microsoft's New Cyber Assessment Tool Just Dropped. It's a discussion about Microsoft's secure score for cybersecurity in the corporate environment. We consider it from a cybersecurity perspective, the compliance perspective, the AI perspective, and how it all may work out going forward. The episode comes in at just around 20 minutes. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for another episode of Compliance Into the Weeds with my good friend and colleague, Matt Kelly. Matt, welcome.
Hello, Tom. Always good to be here.
Matt, you wrote a just extraordinarily interesting blog post entitled Microsoft's New Cyber Assessment Tool Just Dropped. And I really like to use this blog post as just a launching point because you've got a ton of stuff in here about the specific tool, about its implications, about the compliance profession and the way forward. So I'd just like to see kind of where we can take this. But why don't you kind of lay the groundwork and tell the listeners what the Microsoft New Cyber Assessment Tool is and how, at least it appears, they intend to use it.
Sure. So this is a tool that would be useful for any business that uses Office 365, and that's the Microsoft Office software platform, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, all that. But it's the cloud-delivered version of it, and that is important because how many businesses use Office 365 now? Roughly about 85 million. So there are a lot of businesses out there that are using Microsoft Office software for all sorts of things, but they're using it in the cloud, and Microsoft is managing it. So what it has done is it has created this ranking system called Secure Score, where it will essentially evaluate each corporate customer's cybersecurity efforts. Microsoft has been experimenting in a pilot program with this since last summer, but basically there are 77 different security settings for Office 365, and each customer can configure its security settings its own way, but Microsoft is going to come up with what it deems to be a best practices cybersecurity posture based on those 77 settings, and then compare what you're doing to those 77, and you can also compare yourself to the norm of all those 85 million. So that's number one, is that it's going to rate the effectiveness of your cybersecurity. Number two, Secure Score will also then show each customer, here is how you could tweak your configuration relative to our 77 standards to improve your score. Exactly what your score might be, that's going to vary from company to company. If you buy a bigger version, your possible maximum score might be, say, 400. If I buy a smaller version, my score might be only 200. But it will say you've scored 115 out of 200 or 400 or whatever. Here's what you can do to push it up higher to the maximum. So really what they're doing is they are creating a tool to get their customers to follow these best practices for cybersecurity as Microsoft decides them or deems them based on its big profile of 85 million customers and what they're doing. So that's what it is.
So that's just the start of it. I mean, that's just the basics. So I guess the first thought I have is that, one, this was not available or not a tool that could be utilized with any prior version of Microsoft because none of them really had the cloud nature that allowed Microsoft to run the big data, test everyone's security settings, number one. But number two, Microsoft did not have the ability to review or analyze specific security settings of individual companies or users until they had the sort of new technological breakthrough which allowed them to do this. And then number three is they, because of their market position, but because of bringing this tool out, they may set the standard now for security settings and security setting scores, much as the way Transparency International has done with the Corruption Perception Index. And that there may be more sophisticated scores or more sophisticated analyses that persons or companies can come up with, yet Microsoft may set the standard really for the world in this.
That is possible solely because Microsoft Office is probably the most common software in the world. For most people, including, say, myself, I just downloaded these programs on my laptop, so I could not use this. You must use it through its cloud offering of Office 365. I am sure that competitors to Microsoft will be doing something similar or probably already are doing various incarnations or versions of this. Google, at some point, I'm sure will do this. RSA, I don't know for a fact what Google and RSA are doing, but this is the sort of thing that they would want to do. A lot of these big software providers are now moving to roll it out through the cloud. The argument that they should be doing security is also, by the way, this is a no-brainer for most companies. Your IT security person would be the first to say, leave data protection to the data protection experts, who is not your IT guy who's overworked, underpaid, has too many other things going on. They would love to be able to push a lot of security risk to a much better informed and powerful group like Microsoft, Google, RSA. This is what they do for a living. And it frees up your own IT systems to focus on more things like behavioral analytics or trying to figure out, is Russia hacking us versus China? Why is that? Those kind of things. That's what your IT people want to do anyways. So we'll see other players doing this sort of thing where they deliver services through the cloud and articulate what good best practices are and how you can get there. But this is just the first of what I think will ultimately be a recurring theme as our automated data overlords take over our mere human lives in existence. This is how it's going to go.
Well, I guess I don't see the big brother fear in this. What I see is the opportunity, because for the first time you have that information available in one very large silo, the cloud, as opposed to individual silos with the corporations. And I see that exact problem or example in corporations with the type of information that a compliance officer would need, which you and I have talked about at some length previously. But I really wanted to maybe get your thoughts on what's the role of the compliance practitioner or the compliance professional in security controls?
Well, I think that the compliance officer will play a very important supporting role in what's going on here because, number one, you need to articulate to your cloud service provider, whether it's Microsoft or Google or somebody else. But, those cloud service providers would need to know exactly what sort of data you do have. And you would need to play a role in making sure, do we understand that we have European citizens' data that might have extra security requirements as opposed to U.S. or other nationalities' data? There might be some requirements there for compliance purposes. I also think that as Microsoft and others starts telling companies, here's what you could do to improve your security, well, that's a policy change. That's a control change or something like that. Whatever they might tell your company that it should do, policy and control changes, that's in the compliance officer's wheelhouse. One big idea that Microsoft and others are pushing is the idea of two-factor authentication. So I log into a system with my first password, which then sends a second password to my phone, and then I have to enter that in as well. But it would only work if I know my first password and I have my phone for a second password. Now, Microsoft and others think this is a good idea. I think it's a good idea too. I also think it's a pain in the neck, and I think a lot of employees would react that way. It's a policy change. How is this going to work? What does this mean? So compliance officers and IT security officers are going to be holding hands and being very buddy-buddy as they go through these changes. But one cannot do this job well without the other right there with them. So that's something that compliance officers would need to think about if they do start using this Secure Score or some similar program, which I'm sure that there are other efforts out there like this. Secure Score is just going to be the big splash because it's Microsoft.
So let me take that in a couple of different directions, Matt. First of all, I once worked for a large energy service company, and they went through the following exercise, which was they took a look at if requiring a message to come up before every document was stored, asking if it could be deleted. And you had to affirmatively check yes or no. And the reason was to cut down on the amount of dead documents which were taking up server space. In looking at that issue on how to configure that message, turned out it was going to take about 10 to 15 seconds to read the message, click yes or make a decision, click yes or no, and go back to the task at hand. This was at a company that had about 75,000 people. They ran some calculations and determined that this was going to cost in employee time somewhere between $10 to $15 million annually. And based upon that cost, management rejected the idea. I could see a similar type of analysis here on the multi-factor authentication. If your computer goes dormant, so you have to log in every 3 to 5 minutes simply as a security precaution, a baseline security precaution, and you have to have a multi-factor authentication process, you can have the same amount of downtime. And I could see management simply rejecting that, even though it is certainly more secure, but rejecting it as business inefficient or as actually a business cost. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a very valid point that a lot of security software and analyst people are thinking about, and they are coming around to a school of thought that moves away from authentication, because authentication does play an important part for some things. Like if you are a defense contractor working on a missile guidance system, those 10 extra seconds are a small price to pay if you're logging in to look at the plans. But those 10 extra seconds, if you're just looking to see what's in the corporate cafeteria, let's all be honest. Like, who cares if North Korea steals your corporate cafeteria menu? Big deal. It's not worth anything. And security thinkers are trying to get more to the idea of identity management, where some assets that have virtually no value to anyone, like what's on the menu at the corporate cafeteria, you don't need to protect those. But some other assets are extremely valuable, and you're going to protect them no matter what. But it becomes more of a judgment call, and more analyzing the value asset by asset, as security officers like to say, and then figuring out what is a practical security protocol that will work, that will be worth the time, and does actually address the risks that you have to worry about. You don't have to worry as a board about somebody hacking into the menu just to find out you're having spaghetti on Tuesday. You have to lose sleep over the design plans for your next product, or the next drug pill or the next merger plan, or whatever your industry might be and what you're doing. And, sussing out those valuable assets and how to protect them well, that's going to be the big challenge here.
If I could translate that into Tom Fox complianceese, I might even say that sounds like a risk-based analysis.
It is indeed. And now it's going to get more tricky because more digital assets will be able to get created more quickly. You might not necessarily know what the value is of what you're creating. And there's, a certain amount of trade-off that the cloud allows. Like, Tom, you were talking about how this energy company didn't want to occupy memory space with all of these documents. Well, in the cloud, there's no memory limit. There just isn't. So why would you bother to think about, do I need to delete this or not? You don't have to, not for storage. Now, you would have to delete it, say, for minimizing litigation risks, but that's a whole other analysis. And that's not the same as saying, do we need to store this because our servers are full? Your servers are never full in the cloud. But if you store everything, your litigation risk is going to go up. All sorts of consequential follow-on analyses are going to they're going to change because of what the cloud is allowing. And that's just one quick example. There are many more.
So when I look at this and listen to you talk about it, I guess I'm excited because it seems to me there's an opportunity for a much wider and broader look at not really all of your data that's in the cloud and the types of information that a chief compliance officer or compliance professional needs, which is generally not available to him, may become available if the company's information is in the cloud and there's a way to access across what used to be siloed information. Is that something as well?
I think so, that really we're going to look at a world where all the data can be stored all together in one big mess. It will need to be tagged and identified clearly so you can pick out your particular molecule that you want from the big mess, but it will all be in there. You'll need the proper algorithms to crunch all the specific molecules you want that you have pulled out from the mess to get the answer that you'd like. But it really becomes a question for big companies of what do we want to do that we're good at? What do we want done that we're not good at that we're just going to farm out? Most companies are not going to be as good at security as Microsoft, Google, some of the others like that, like RSA. You'd rent data storage and data protection from them. But let's say you are Zillow or Redfin or some other real estate company that calculates home values. Those are the algorithms that you're good at. That's your core competency. You're going to keep that into yourself. But the data is going to be stored elsewhere. It's going to be this, some people have said it's an ecosystem. That's a bit of a corny buzzword, but it works. That, you're going to be thinking about what you're good at, what you're not good at. Compliance officers certainly would think more about due diligence or third-party monitoring. What part of that do they want to do? What part of that do they want to rent the ability from somebody else and store the data with somebody else? But those two things have to interact, and then I just get to look at the answer on my screen. Those are the sort of incarnations of technology that we're going to see in the future. And Microsoft's Secure Score is just a good cybersecurity example. But we're going to see more.
So you've labeled something called the One True Path, which seems to me to have the following parts. One part AI with a big dose of analytics, one part risk assessment to determine your compliance obligations, and one part astute policy management and training to get the employees to follow along, and then indicate that the compliance officer is involved in at least two of those. Is that how you see this going forward?
I do, yeah. I think, I'm not opposed to artificial intelligence. I'm all for it. I think we don't have enough real intelligence in the world, so we need even more. That's great. But artificial intelligence is just the algorithms to crunch the data. You will still need to understand what are you supposed to do with this data. That's compliance obligations, regulatory requirements. Those are some things you have to do with your data. And then when you come up with some best practices to improve your operations, you're going to have to implement those. And policy management, policy changes, controls, and making sure that they work, that is very much what compliance officers do as well. Some of this AI you're going to rent from an AI provider of some kind. Some of this AI your business is going to draw up itself because that's what it does. But these are, I think, the three big elements to make big data, artificial intelligence, and big analytics, all of this, to make it all work. And compliance officers are very much going to be involved in making sure that all of that goes well. Otherwise, you're just going to have artificial stupidity, and we already have enough of that in big corporations already. So that's where, you need to play a role.
So if we could maybe bring this out of the cloud down to a tangible example here on planet Earth, you also cite to the Hartford Insurance Company and how the Hartford will use this information in its evaluation of risk and assessment of policyholders' cybersecurity systems. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, that is something that Microsoft and Hartford announced when they made this joint announcement about Secure Score. They announced it, I think, on February 9th or so, just before the RSA Security Conference, which is big, happening this week out in San Francisco. So I think that there is a tie-in here. I do not know this is a fact, but they did come out with a joint announcement that the Hartford will be using your Secure Score as it is examining your cybersecurity practices before it sets a price for cyber insurance your company might want to buy from the Hartford. This isn't really conceptually any different than a health or life insurance company trying to figure out, do you smoke or not? And if you're a 65-year-old 3-pack-a-day smoker, your life insurance is more expensive than a 22-year-old marathon runner who's never smoked at all. It's about your business practices dictating the risk that you will be taking or that you have, and then insurance officers or insurance firms will price their insurance based on what your practices and your risks are. Will we see this more often in the future? Probably. I suspect that Hartford and Microsoft want to use this as an enticement. I also suspect in the future we'll see some insurance companies making these sorts of things mandatory. But again, everything that Microsoft is talking about here, this is not a bad idea. This is about pushing companies, whether they like it or not, to a higher level of security effectiveness. And I don't think there's any board that's going to say, forget it, we're just not interested in that. They're all interested, and this is a good way to get there.
I think you're absolutely right. I certainly agree, and that actually I find this quite exciting, particularly for some of the reasons we talked about and other reasons that I think will give us opportunity to use this data in ways that we have not articulated on this podcast because, frankly, we haven't thought of yet. So really interesting new development by Microsoft, and just a great blog post from you, Matt. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Compliance Into the Weeds. I have 2 requests for you. The first, if you've listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate us. It would help in our rankings and expand the breadth of our listener base. Also, if you have any questions, please email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com or mattkelly@mkelly@radicalcompliance.com. This is Tom Fox. I look forward to visiting with you again in another episode of Compliance Into the Weeds.